Hey, what's up guys? How's it going? So does anybody remember the Ape Escape franchise? It was really popular back in the PlayStation 1 and 2 era. In fact, it used to be one of PlayStation's mascots, if you could believe it, as well as Parappa the Rapper and a few others, but Ape Escape used to be really popular back in the day. I would say more so in Japan rather than America, but you get my point. Now the Ape Escape franchise seems kind of forgotten. Why is that? Well, what I want to do today is just go through the history of the franchise and sort of review each of the games. We're going to go in order. We're going to do the main games first, of course, Ape Escape 1, 2, and 3, then the PlayStation Portable games, and of course the other games. We're going to see where this franchise started and sort of where it's at now. And would it be possible to bring the Ape Escape series back? Because all we've gotten so far from this franchise recently is just ports to the PS4. And I honestly sense a lot of potential with this franchise. It can become one of PlayStation's mascots again besides Spider-Man and God of War and all that other stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good. There just isn't really too many games like Ape Escape on the PS5, and that's a bit of a shame. In fact, Sony has a lot of forgotten games, but we're going off the rails. Enough bullshit. Let's just get started with Ape Escape 1.
Over 200 apes are on the loose, and it's up to you to stop them. Introducing Ape Escape. You'll use plenty of anti-ape devices, like a stun club, a slingshot, and monkey radar. You'll chase apes in a tank. You'll steer a remote control car. You'll even launch an aerial attack in a propeller-powered Skyflyer. But you better prepare yourself, because things can get pretty hairy. Ape Escape. You better get them before they get you. PlayStation.
So, Ape Escape released back in 1999 for the PS1, and this was the first game to introduce DualShock controls. The games like Spyro or maybe Tomb Raider or Final Fantasy, it was just an option to have DualShock controls. Now it was sort of a requirement. Of course, the left stick controls Spike and the right stick controls the weapons. And to be honest, Ape Escape sticks out a lot for this generation, that's full of collectibles like Spyro, Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, so on and so on. Because you have to capture apes, and they're obviously going to try to escape.
He said it!
But I believe you get my point. This game sold fairly well back in the day. I believe it sold over 1 million copies, and this game is just overall essential to the PS1. But let's talk a little bit about story. Now, of course, during this generation, the story didn't really matter as much because, it's about collectibles, and we'll just say story wasn't a main essential during this generation. But when it comes to Ape Escape, and this is going to be a bit wild, but there's this monkey amusement park, and of course the main attraction is Spectre. And he finds this helmet made by the professor that makes him hyper intelligent, and of course he clones the helmet, gives it to a bunch of monkeys. They go throughout time, and you as Spike have to go throughout time and capture the monkeys. And of course with that comes with a lot of level variety and difficulty. Now let's focus on gameplay for a second, and let's focus on the tools that you'll be using to capture the apes that are trying to escape.
There it is!
Okay, I'll stop that now. So you do use a lot of weapons to capture the monkeys throughout the game, and unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you think about it, you have to go through a tutorial every time you unlock a new weapon. In my opinion, these were kind of annoying, but that's only because I've been playing these games for a decade now. When it comes to tools, of course, you have the time net, which you use to capture monkeys, and you have the stun club, which of course stuns the monkeys, and you get the point. And then there's the water net, which you use to capture apes trying to escape underwater.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
Okay, I'm for real this time, I'll stop, but I think y'all get what I'm saying. There's a lot of tools and weapons that you could use throughout the game. And to be honest, some of these feel like gimmicks and others feel kind of, useful. But like I said before, this game stands up pretty well for a PS1 game when it comes to other platformers, graphically. It's just overall good. Not to get too deep into this, but this game is released right in between the 5th and 6th generation. And I feel like this game does well for the 5th generation. It shows what the PS1 can really do. It shows what the PS1 is really capable of, what it can pull off. In a way, this was peak PS1. I mean, not to go off the rails, but just look at the launch games for the PS1 and Ape Escape. There's obviously a huge difference graphically, and you could really tell the work that was put in to make this game. Enough of that rant, enough of that bullshit. Let's move on to Ape Escape 2, but here's a little bit of a caveat, I guess. I don't think there was a American commercial release for Ape Escape 2, so we're gonna have to play the Japanese commercial. My apologies for that. And yeah, enough bullshit. Ape Escape 2.
実はね、サンタさんが来てるの。嘘だーい。わー、プレゼントだ。サンタだ。あいつこんなところに。はい。奥さん、猿来てるでしょ。待って、逃げて。逃げまとは。待って。離してください、奥さん。逃げて。プレイステーション。
Well, geez, that was a fucked up commercial, but Ape Escape 2, one of my personal favorites. In fact, this game introduced me to the Ape Escape franchise. I think this was the first PS2 game I played back in the day, but either way, we're going off the rails. Ape Escape 2. It improves and does a lot for the franchise. Now, let's just get started with the graphics. As you can see, the jump from the PS1 to the PS2 is very clear. I mean, obviously you got a bit more detail, things aren't as jagged as they were, in the 5th generation. You get the point. The game looks good. It looks fabulous. Oh god, that was gay. But overall, this game does a lot and, I guess, enhances a lot from the previous game. Example, the level design. Obviously, you're going to be going around different areas like a harbor or a factory, Statue of Liberty, old school Japan. You get the point. There's a lot of level variety here. It isn't just, one theme. And honestly, I think I like that a bit more compared to Ape Escape 1's level design. Now, a few more things that this game enhances is personality. When you captured monkeys in Ape Escape 1, that was just it, you called it a day. But in this game, they actually have personality, they have names and stuff like that. There's a lot of different monkey varieties. Of course, you got the monkeys with the guns, the monkeys with the boxing gloves, the monkeys with the bombs, you got the depressed monkeys. There's a lot of different types, and to be honest, it brings a lot of fun and difficulty. For example, the monkeys with the bombs. Those are the hardest monkeys to capture. And then of course there's the monkeys with the guns, and you can obviously see why those are difficult. But look, we seem to be going off the rails. I think you get my point by now. There's different types of monkeys with varying difficulty, and that brings a lot of personality to the game. Like I said before, when you capture a monkey in Ape Escape 1, they're just a random nameless monkey. Now they have a name, they have a backstory. Every random monkey you catch in the game has some sort of story to it. Of course, to access that story, you need to go back to the hub area, and that brings us to our next subject, the hub world. Now with this, it's a little bit different because Ape Escape 2 introduces mini games. And I gotta be honest, it's kind of a gimmick, but I don't know. It's fun every once in a while, but you don't play Ape Escape 2 just to play the mini game, so I don't really see a point, but hey, it is what it is. Of course, you can save, you can load, all that basic stuff, and you can also read information about the monkeys you've catched. And honestly, maybe I'm going too deep into this, but I like that. It seems like every developer kind of put a little bit of detail, a little bit of personality into each and every monkey that you're supposed to catch throughout a different level. Like each monkey has sort of a small backstory, you could say. I mean, hell, even the enemies, there's just a lot of detail in this game, and I absolutely love it. Now, of course, how can we talk about the hub world, the monkeys, the this and the that, without talking about the story? Alright, so I'll be honest, the story in Ape Escape 2 isn't really as interesting as Ape Escape 1. So apparently you as the main character were supposed to deliver paints to Monkey Park, but apparently you delivered the helmets as well. And because of that, now the main enemy from the last game has the helmet. Now you have to do this all over again, but it's not throughout time, it's throughout, different countries and shit like that. I mean, again, it's a game from 20 years ago. I'm not going to question the storyline. Like I said a few minutes ago, story doesn't really play too much of a role. But of course, with the Spectre being the main enemy, you also have 5 boss fights. And these aren't your typical, regular monkeys. These are monkeys with Vita Z bananas, which make them extra stronger and smarter. You get the point. But either way, for the most part, the boss fights are pretty easy. The story is pretty basic. You just go through level to level, capturing a certain amount of monkeys and calling it a day. Occasionally, you may have a boss fight, but that's about it. Overall, though, at least in my opinion, Ape Escape 2 is one of the best games in the series. Again, and I'm gonna sound biased, but it's not because, I've played it a lot back in the day, but this game adds and enhances so much from the original game and just the jump graphics-wise. I mean, it's a platformer, I know I shouldn't expect much, but this game holds up extremely well today. Graphically, gameplay-wise, it's just great. But let's move on to Ape Escape 3.
Spectre is back to brainwash the world, one TV at a time, in Ape Escape 3.
Those monkeys are loose again!
Grab your nets. Transform into your favorite hero and catch some monkeys.
I'm more powerful than I ever was!
We did it!
That's right! Ape Escape 3. Only on PlayStation 2. Rated E for everyone.
Alright, Ape Escape 3, unfortunately the last main game in the series. Now, this game seems to be very underrated, and I can definitely see why. I believe this game released back in 2006, and by that point the PS3 was halfway out the door, so nobody was really paying too much attention to the PS2 library at that point, so I can definitely see why this game flew under the radar. I mean, hell, some people never heard of Ape Escape 3, they just think of the first 2 games. And that's kind of weird, but also understandable. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the story. Now, in my opinion, I'm not really a big fan of the story. Just like last time, your main enemy is Spectre, and this time he starts a TV station where, of course, the monkeys film TV shows and movies to mind control the humans. And like I said last time, the story is mostly a background thing, but come on, I feel like they could have done a better job with the story. Although the story is kind of lacking, there is a lot of creativity with that. You know, just going through different TV sets and movie sets. Like as you can see throughout this level, they're kind of ripping off the Titanic and different, you know, pop culture things like that. There's a lot of creativity in this game. Like I showed in the last game, there was different types of monkeys. Now it's even more. I mean, once you beat the game, you could actually play as the monkey. You could see how long you would last in the monkey suit, you know, before they know it's fake. And to be honest, I like that. Now, gameplay-wise, nothing really changes. You still have the same old tools and weapons, except now the monkeys could actually take your weapons and use it against you, which, while it does bring a lot of difficulty, it does kind of mix things up. You know, let's just say you miss a monkey, he could snatch your net and capture you and send you back to the hub world. And again, I'd have to say I'm a fan of that because that kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit. So this game doesn't really change too much about the gameplay, but it adds that slight bit of difficulty. You have to really be careful where you swing your net or your weapon. Now, before I get into the characters and other small details like that, let's talk about the hub world. Now, nothing much has really changed compared to Ape Escape 2, except now you have a bit of a shopping area instead of that weird coin machine from the previous game. And that kind of brings a decent level of convenience. Like, let's just say I run out of lives, I could easily, you know, buy more instead of getting a random prize. Of course, mini games do make a comeback. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But other than that, the hub world is basically the same. Now let's talk about the characters. This time you have two options. You could either play as Yumi or Kai. Now it doesn't really matter which character you pick, it's mostly just a boy or girl option, except things are a bit easier if you play as Yumi because of course she's a pop star, and some levels some monkeys are starstruck and Yumi kinda has simps, and that means certain monkeys are easier to catch than others. However, since we're on characters, let's just talk a little bit about transform. Now, as I said earlier, you can play as a monkey or a superhero, a knight. You essentially choose a costume that gives you extra abilities. And you get that by collecting small batteries throughout different levels. Now, I'll be honest, some of it does kind of feel like a gimmick, but I would definitely say it has its uses. Now, like I talked about before, the minigames do make a comeback, but there's one I want to talk about in particular, Metal Gear Solid. Of course, it's basically a parody of Metal Gear Solid, and you play as a monkey, and your goal is to basically save Snake. I gotta say, I was not expecting that at all. But overall though, Ape Escape 3 certainly does have its upsides and its downsides. I mean, me personally, it's not one of my favorites, but I'm pretty sure this is some others. And like I said, I was not expecting a Metal Gear Solid parody. That was a great surprise, but let's move on. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that's the main series. Now what we're gonna do here is talk about the spin-offs, the PSP games, and the Japan-only games, and there is a lot. And like I said before, the Ape Escape series was way more popular in Japan than it was in America, as you can see by the commercials I'm showing. As you can see, there's a lot. You can tell by this point, by I would say the mid-2000s, the Ape Escape series has reached its peak, you could say. And like I said before, this was sort of a Sony mascot before this franchise sort of got abandoned. But we seem to be going off the rails, so what we're going to do here is talk about the PSP games. And with the PSP games, I'm going to keep them short and sweet. I'm not going to go as in-depth as I did with the main games. And we're going to get started with the Ape Escape 1 remake for the PSP. Alrighty, Ape Escape 1 for the PSP. As you can tell, it's a bit of a upgrade. Things aren't blocky or as rigid as they were in the PS1 game. And I feel like this kind of translates well to the PSP, although the controls can be kind of confusing, because this game is sort of meant for two joysticks, but the PSP does it, I guess, decently. Control with the little joystick, of course, you use your net and all your tools with the X, square, and triangle button, and this game can just generally feel kind of awkward, but it still works nonetheless. However, I would recommend playing it on emulator versus a real PSP. But other than that, it's just Ape Escape for the PS1. There's not really too much to say that I haven't said before. I'm just putting it in here to make sure I have everything covered. But either way, on to Ape Escape Academy. Alrighty, Ape Escape Academy. Now this is essentially a minigame collection, and it has a tad bit of a story to it. You're basically a monkey and you have to go through these mini games in order to graduate Ape Escape Academy and be part of the next game, I guess. And I'll be honest, the game isn't too bad. It's full of charm and personality. I mean, your teachers in the game are previous boss fights from Ape Escape 2. Now let's just move on to the gameplay. So throughout each level, you're supposed to make it through a certain amount of mini games, and these mini games can be good or bad. But you, as the monkey, are just supposed to make it to the top. But I think you all get what I'm saying by now. And unlike the Ape Escape 1 remake for the PSP, the controls actually work pretty well. You pick out your own monkey, you customize it, it's a decent game for the most part. If you have a PSP, you definitely gotta get this. Oh, before we move on, Ape Escape Academy actually got a sequel. Unfortunately though, it was Japan and PAL only. But nothing really changed from the main game, just a few improvements, and instead of a leveling system, it was mostly a card-based party game. You can still customize your monkey and small things like that. It's mostly the same thing. But let's just move on to the next game.
猿を変形させて駆け抜けろピポサルレーサーこれもらえる
プレイステーションポータブル
Alrighty, Ape Escape Racing, or
サルゲッチュピポサルレーサー
yeah, whatever that said. It's basically Mario Kart just in the Ape Escape format. Of course, your stars, your red shells, your blue shells. This thing is essentially a Mario Kart ripoff. I'm just gonna be honest with you. But I had to put it on here because it's part of the Ape Escape franchise, and yeah, you get the point. Honestly, if you're in the mood for a little bit of Mario Kart fun, just pick up a Japanese PSP in this game, and you get yourself a good time. Now, there is one PSP Ape Escape game that I will go somewhat in depth about. It's Ape Quest. So, imagine if Ape Escape was a somewhat good RPG. That's essentially what this is. It's no Final Fantasy, but it's certainly not the worst either. And the way they released this game was kind of weird too. So the tutorial was free back in the day, but let's just say you wanted to play one of the main plot lines from the game. Well, they released the 3 main plot lines on the PlayStation Store back in 2011. Now, obviously the main game isn't obtainable today, so I can definitely see why this game kind of flew under the radar. But for the most part, the game isn't really too bad. It could be, I guess, tedious at some points, but it's overall not too bad. Here's an example. Let's just say in Final Fantasy, when you run into somebody, you automatically, kind of battle. In Ape Escape, you either battle or do a mini game. Now, obviously, these mini games can get irritating quickly. Like, let's just say you run into a low-level enemy and you have to do a mini game, and you run into him like a bunch of times. You see where I'm going. Now, let's talk about the story for a little bit. And the story is kind of weird. It's not your average Ape Escape storyline. It doesn't involve humans, Monkey Park, Spectre, or any of that. So there's this Monkey King, and you play as his son, and you're meant to go investigate something, and that's where the story sort of begins. For the most part, Ape Quest isn't really a bad spinoff. I mean, it could use some improvements here and there, but it's not too bad. It honestly kind of sticks out from the main trilogy. You play as a monkey on this old island, you investigate stuff. It's decent for the most part. Would I recommend playing it today if you could get a hold of it? Sure. Now, there's one more PSP game I want to talk about, and just like last time, there wasn't an American commercial released for it, so we're gonna have to play the Japanese one, so enough bullshit. Let's get started.
ごめんなさい。確かにあなたを利用したことは認めるわ。でもこれだけは分かってほしいの。私が次のステージに行くには彼と一緒になるしかないの。さよなら。
プレイステーションポータブル
Alrighty, we're gonna wrap up the PSP section with this little gem. Ape Escape Big Mission, or
サルゲットユーサルサル大作戦
Now, Ape Escape Big Mission is another one of those forgotten, or I guess hidden, Ape Escape games. It was released right after Ape Escape 3, and unfortunately it was Japan only. And I feel like that's a bit of a shame because this should have been a main game. Let me explain. For a PSP game, this game works really well, especially when it comes to graphics and controls. Let's just say that this game aged surprisingly well. Now, like I said before, you actually play as one of the monkeys, which is a bit of a change. And just like last time, your goal is to capture the monkeys and defeat Spectre. How you do that, though, is a bit different. So, you pick out a monkey, then control it, then of course, capture all of the other monkeys. A simple concept, but it works well. Now, story. Now, just like last time, Spectre's the main enemy, except this time he's sort of shrunken you down into this little pod. And that is sort of how you control the monkeys. And honestly, there's not much to it story-wise. Now, let's go back to gameplay. Of course, when capturing monkeys, there's going to be different types of monkeys, as you could maybe see by the gameplay. Let's just say you want a monkey that jumps extra higher. You're going to capture a monkey in a bunny suit, or, let's just say you want a monkey with a lot of strength. You're going to capture the monkey with the boxing gloves. Just different things like that. But for the most part, this game is decent. It aged pretty well. And yeah, now ladies and gents, let's move on to the spin-offs. Now just like last time, some of these are going to be Japan only, some of these are going to be PAL only, but one of these games I'm going to go sort of in depth on. And before we move on, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying the content, but enough bullshit. Let's move on to the spin-offs. Now, the first game I want to get started with when it comes to the spin-offs is Ape Escape Pumped and Primed. So there's Mario Party, and this is essentially the Ape Escape version of that. And of course, this game has a small story. It's basically a competition where you're supposed to win this trophy. Of course, some monkeys interfere with that, and you're basically just supposed to win the competition. It's a basic party game, and it's honestly not too bad single player wise. I know playing a party game, single player is kind of weird, but this game does a lot for the, I guess, single player aspect of that, even though party games are meant to be played with multiple people. Of course, the same characters return, and yeah, it's basically Mario Party, just a bunch of mini games with occasional boss fights. The game honestly isn't too bad. Now, before we move on, the next game we're going to be talking about is Japan only, so of course it has a Japanese commercial, but enough bullshit, let's move on.
Très bien! Salut, 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 get you! Très bien! Salut, get you! Get you! Pants, très bien!
猿のパンツがトレビアンピコサル2001
プレイステーション
Ape Escape 2001. Now this I consider a bit of a prequel to Ape Escape 2. This game takes place right after Ape Escape 1, where you capture all the monkeys. Of course, you're supposed to return the monkeys to Monkey Park, but before that you have to wash the monkeys' pants, it's weird. The monkeys get dropped off in a virtual world, and you're supposed to go in there and, of course, get their pants. Don't take that out of context. Now, I'm really surprised that this isn't considered a main game, because this game has a decent amount of lore to it, I guess. It takes right after the first game. You beat Spectre, you do all that, and then in the second one, you just do the same thing again. I feel like this would have been appropriate for a main game in America or Europe, but it's Japan only. Now, gameplay, nothing has really changed it. Instead of using a net or a stun club, you're of course using a vacuum to suck up the monkeys' pants. Just like in the main game, there's a certain amount of monkeys you have to catch. In this game, there's a certain amount of pants you have to catch. And at the end, you put them all in a washing machine, which I find a little bit funny. Overall, though, this is really underrated Ape Escape game. I would say this is the most underrated in the bunch. Like this game doesn't really get any recognition. Now, the next game that we'll be taking a look at is iToy Monkey Mania. And I'm just gonna be honest with you, it's just shovelware. It's Mario Party just with it's kind of hard to explain, but when the PS2 came out, it had this attachment called the iToy. It would track your movements, stuff like that. It was similar to the Xbox Kinect, except it was just a camera. And of course, with that came with a bunch of shovelware, and this is one of them. Similar to Pumped and Primed, except it was made for kids. There's no storyline, nothing really serious. You just pick a board, do a bunch of mini games, and that's it. I'll be honest, this game certainly isn't the best of the Ape Escape lineup. I had to throw it in here because, I'm covering everything, so let's just forget that this exists and let's talk about a good Ape Escape game. Now, one of the last games we'll be talking about is Ape Escape 1 Million Monkeys. Now, unfortunately, this was Japan only, and this strays far away from the typical Ape Escape game. It has multiple stories, multiple plot lines, different endings. If anything, I would compare this game to Shadow the Hedgehog, except this game is actually good. Now, like I said before, you could actually play as the good side or the bad side. And what I mean by that is you could either play as Spike or Spectre. Now, this game really mixes up the series, and it's a shame that it was Japan only. I think this game released around 2006, 2007. I feel like this game would fit perfectly in America at the time. Either or going off the rails, this game is also a bit of a hack and slash. You could potentially see there's multiple boss fights, and this game strays far away from the typical Ape Escape formula, but to be honest, I like it. It offers something new besides, oh no, Spectre's intelligent, we gotta stop him and stop all the that typical formula. This game does a bit more than that. I also like the art direction that this game took. It's more like an anime style compared to the, kiddie Ape Escape look. And hey, if you want to, grab a Japanese PS2 and a copy of this game and have a good time. And obviously, I should have said this before, but all the Japanese older games have been translated. You could easily find that online. I probably should have said it earlier, but hey, it is what it is. Now, on to the last game of the Ape Escape franchise. Ape Escape for the PS3. I have been dreading to talk about this game. It is one of the worst games in the franchise besides the iToy game. And that's a bit of a shame. I feel like a game like Ape Escape would have worked well on the PS3. It kind of feels like once after Ape Escape 3 came out, Sony was kind of dragging the Ape Escape franchise along. Like, this franchise was just relegated to the PS1, 2, and PSP. And just imagine what a next-gen Ape Escape game would have looked like. It is a shame. But let's talk about the last Ape Escape game. Ape Escape for the PS3. I mean, to explain it, it doesn't really have a storyline or anything serious. It's just like the iToy game, just a little bit more, I guess, technically competent. Like it could actually, detect your movements on the screen. And as you can see by the gameplay, there's really nothing that this game offers. No storyline, no Spike, no Spectre. I mean, again, it is a bit of a shame that this whole series was stuck on the PS1, 2, and PSP. It feels like Sony didn't want this series to make it to the next generation. But you know what? It's whatever. At least we have a ton of great games that are still being discovered to this day. I mean, look at Ape Quest, look at Big Mission, look at 1 Million Monkeys. These games still haven't really been talked about. Still a ton of potential left in this franchise. Now, can it make a comeback besides just remakes and redos? Yes. I feel like this series should come back. Just imagine what a new Ape Escape game would look like on the PS5. It would look amazing. But either way, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to, like, subscribe, do whatever you want to do, Nourish, and tell me down below. What's your favorite Ape Escape game, and do you think the Ape Escape franchise could make a comeback? Tell me down in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.